if you're going to dive into the early church, which don't do that unless you want to become Catholic or Orthodox. Don't do that. It's very dangerous for you. Because once you dive into the early church, you remove modernity from your lens that you read the Bible through. And you must become Catholic or Orthodox. There just is no other honest option. To be deep in church history is to cease to be Protestant. It's just true. Welcome back to Embracing Tradition. If you haven't already seen it, I do have a full conversion story, my story of coming into the Catholic Church. Or really, I made the story before we were officially confirmed, but it was while we were committed to joining the church. We're going to link that for you. But I'd like to do a follow-up video from that and kind of just talk about the main arguments that led me into the Catholic Church. So if you haven't seen the other video, I was a Reformed pastor. Actually, I'll start before that. I was an Independent Baptist pastor, ordained in the Independent Baptist Church as a missionary to Honduras. Then I was a youth pastor with them. And then I discovered Reformed theology. I thought that I was finding the early church, but then I discovered that I really just found about 500 years ago instead of 2,000 years ago. And I went through the Reformed Baptist, part of my life, and I was ordained again as a Reformed Baptist elder. And I was a Reformed Baptist for 3 or 4 years, and then we were convinced of paedobaptism because all of the Reformed Baptists just read Presbyterians. So I was reading Puritans and John Calvin and all of the Reformers. And I was fairly quickly convinced to go that route, and so I became a Presbyterian. Well, after 2 or 3 years, I accepted a position in our PCA church, and I was working towards my Master's of Divinity. So as I'm attempting to receive my third ordination, which sounds absolutely absurd saying it out loud, but that's what I was doing, my wife decided that she was going to destroy all of that and become a Catholic. So she was convinced, kind of separate from me, definitely before I was. And she began to bombard me with all of these questions that I didn't really have great answers for. I had some answers. I had the cookie cutter answers that I was supposed to give, but they just really, I think deep down I just knew that they weren't sufficient. They weren't enough. They didn't answer them fully. One of the questions that I remember her asking, she was very good at using my words against me. And one of the paradigms that I had been dealing with in my own mind, it was one that I was using quite often, was, why would we believe, some interpretation about a particular passage in the Bible? Why would we believe that it's saying this thing, this interpretation, if no Christian ever believed that, before 5 minutes ago? It was very strong, very compelling way of reasoning. I remember she began wearing a head covering because of our understanding of 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And as a Protestant, I'm looking for commentaries and evidence, and I quickly discover that there is no one on the planet, whether they were Orthodox, Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, any denomination, you really can't find anyone prior to 75, 100 years ago that had the current position, majority position of the church today, which is that head coverings are just a cultural thing from 1 Corinthians, or, the head covering is just talking about their hair, the woman's hair. Well, as Protestants, Candace and I were diving into the commentaries. We're reading the early church fathers, we're reading the Reformers, we're reading the Puritans, and virtually everyone for 2,000 years said that a head covering, which was an actual covering, not just their hair, is what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 11. And so really the most compelling argument to me was the appeal to authority, which I know is technically a logical fallacy, but I think it's a very strong argument that can be used in certain instances. And we were appealing to the historicity of what Christians have always believed. Christians have always believed this. Well, that's just one particular application to that paradigm, that way of thinking. But when you fully accept that way of thinking, that the world has gone crazy, the world's modern and progressive, and they're making new stuff up all the time, and I'm tired of all the new stuff. I don't want any new stuff. I want old things that are tried and true. I want to raise my family in a way that faithful men and women have always raised their family. I don't need to make anything up. We've been here for thousands of years. We don't need to make stuff up. And so I had accepted that paradigm. And that paradigm is what Candace and others used to really break down all of my arguments against the Catholic Church. Because you find very quickly that, if you're a Baptist, there are no Baptists beyond 300-400 years ago. They didn't exist. They were not. Like, the Baptist history has to claim people like Waldensians and Hussites, people that would kill a modern-day Baptist for heresy. In their trail of blood where they claim were like the proto-Baptists, those people would not look anything close to a Baptist today. They wouldn't believe anything like it's absolutely ridiculous. If you are really any type of Protestant, your beliefs don't go back very far. Now, not all of them, of course, but the main reasons why you're not a Catholic, the reason why you're protesting, those reasons don't go back very far. And as we analyze them, the case becomes, I believe, irrefutable that we should just go back to the early church, that we should just go back to what Christians have always believed. If you are sick of modernity and the insanity that is going on in our world today, where men are women and women are men, and there are 1,000 genders, and all of the other insane things that are going on today, if you're sick of that, then the answer to that is, well, what did people believe before this insanity has possessed our world? What did people believe before that? Well, before that, people believed this and this and this. When you go down that trail, when you accept that paradigm, that is what was key for me. And I had already accepted that as a Protestant. I had already, in the PCA, I was believing things that I didn't know anybody else believed in the PCA. Like, my wife was covering her head in the church service, and there was nobody else in our church that was doing that. We were already very Catholic in our understanding of family planning. We have 5 children. As Presbyterians, we had 5 children. Why was that? Well, because I believe that contraception was sinful as a Presbyterian. Well, how did I come to that conclusion? No Presbyterian anywhere believes that dogmatically. In no confession of no Protestant confession does it say anything about contraception. Why did I believe that? Well, because that's what Christians have always believed until 5 minutes ago. And what is the only church on the planet today? There's one church on the planet that upholds the sanctity of life in a ban of contraception. There's only one, and it's the Catholic Church. So I was already becoming Catholic before I even knew it. Just accepting the paradigm that maybe we should believe things that Christians have always believed and get rid of this nonsense, this modernity, this progressive liberalism that has possessed our culture. And so when you do that, I think there are some other key giants that fall, doctrinal giants. So these doctrinal giants that fell for me rather quickly once I had that paradigm really solidified in my mind. One of them, probably the foundational one, was Sola scriptura. That's probably the foundational doctrine of Protestantism. And Sola scriptura is absolutely novel. Like it just did not exist prior to the Reformation. Now, the Reformed bros will quote St. Augustine, until they're blue in the face. And really, one thing that I want to challenge you with, if you're going to dive into the early church, which don't do that unless you want to become Catholic or Orthodox, don't do that. It's very dangerous for you. Because once you dive into the early church, you remove modernity from your lens that you read the Bible through. And you must become Catholic or Orthodox. There just is no other honest option. I'm convinced of that. To be deep in church history is to cease to be Protestant. It's just true. And so, but one thing that you have to do, and I see this all the time, I'm in groups where I'm talking to Protestants, and they do this so much, and maybe to be fair, everyone does this to some degree, but the only way to get Sola Scriptura from the early church fathers, from Augustine, is to quote mine. Do you know what quote mining is? It's when, you go to ChatGPT or Google and you just find a sentence or a paragraph where somebody a long time ago said something that sounds a lot like what you believe. It's a really dishonest approach, and you can do that and find Sola Scriptura. You can do that because St. Augustine and other saints and early church fathers absolutely held up the authority of the scriptures. Of course they did. Because no Christian believed that the scriptures were nothing, or that the scriptures shouldn't be authoritative, or that we shouldn't view them as infallible and inspired by God and given to us for our edification. And that once we depart from the scriptures, we're in grave danger. Of course, St. Augustine is going to say things like that. But then to take that, a man who was through and through Catholic, who has Marian doctrine through and through, praying to saints and all of these things about being faithful to the Catholic Church, to take that man and suggest that he believes Sola Scriptura, absolutely, utterly dishonest. It's insane. You can't do that. The second giant that falls, it really goes right along with this, because they'll do the same thing, and that is with sola fide. If Sola Scriptura is the foundation, sola fide is really the lifeblood of Protestants. And they'll do the same thing. They'll find Bible verses, such as in Romans, and they'll find quotes by quote mining the early church fathers that speak of faith. Well, of course, the scriptures and of course the early church fathers speak very positively of faith. But do they read the Catechism of the Catholic Church in order to find that the Catholic Church speaks very positively about faith as well? Recently, I've sent quotes of the Catholic Catechism to Protestant friends without them knowing that it's a quote from the Catechism, and they think it's great. It's like, oh, well, that's in the Catholic Catechism. Do you agree with this definition of faith? Yeah, it's a great definition. Yeah, well, that's what we believe. Catholics believe that? Yeah. One more giant doctrine that has to fall whenever you are accepting this paradigm and you're diving into the early church, and that is the doctrine of the Eucharist. That Christ is truly present, body and blood, in the Eucharist. I mean, I'm not sure if there is any other doctrine that is more clear from reading the early church fathers, really from reading anyone prior to the 1500s. It is so crystal clear that this is the monolithic understanding. There is one understanding in the East or the West. Now, the Orthodox don't describe it as transubstantiation. They don't use that word. But they believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Almost all of the Orthodox friends that I have, they're like, yeah, we don't love the terminology of transubstantiation. They think it might go too far in certain instances. But for the most part, they affirm transubstantiation. They affirm the concept, which is from the fathers, that Christ's body and blood is really offered to us in the Eucharist. It's biblical. It's from John 6. It's patristic. Unless we're going to just say that Christians for 1,500 years just didn't know what they were talking about, and they believed horrible heresy for a very long time. And not just a part of the church, but the entire church for 1,500 years believed wrong about these major issues of doctrine. Unless we're going to say that, which some Baptists and others are comfortable with saying, I'm not, then we must go back and accept that we have been deceived. We have been lied to. We have been taught wrong and poorly. It's been a year that I have been Catholic now, and I couldn't be more thankful. I had no idea a year ago how I was going to provide for my family. I had no idea what kind of job I was going to have. And I can't even go into the details. But God has provided for me and my family every step of the way. He's blessed us in ways that we don't deserve. And if you are on the fence, if you're not sure about these, just kind of making that plunge or that leap, I have zero regrets. I was told by a lot of people, yeah, you're going to get in there and you're going to have all these regrets. You're going to be you're going to have buyer's remorse immediately. Could not be further from the truth. I think I've prayed more in the last 12 months than 35 years as a Protestant. I'm older than that. 37 years as a Protestant. Wow, I'm getting old. But the Catholic Church has strengthened my life spiritually. I've seen my wife and my children grow, and we are so thankful that we are part of the church that Christ established through his apostles, and that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church that Christ established.